Good morning. Hi, ladies. We are starting our interview series part 2 today. So I have Kaitlyn joining me. She's about to pop on, and once she does, I'll add her in for the interview. But of course, just a reminder while we have her join, the reason we're doing this interview series is because oftentimes it can feel overwhelming when you're like, I don't even know where to start or who what I want to, what I'm going towards, right? And so that's why I'm going to just tag her quickly so she sees it. But that's really why we're doing this, right? So it's because we want to be able to, great. It's because we want to be able to show you examples of what success looks like, because that makes it a little bit easier to actually replicate, right? You know what you're going towards because you've seen other people do those kind of things. So as Kaitlyn joins, we'll give her a sec. Kaitlyn, when you hop on, if you can just give me a hello and then we'll add you in. But yeah, we're giving you more examples of what this can look like, where your end goal is going to be. And I'm super excited for you guys to get to chat with her because she is amazing. So I just saw someone pop on. I'm assuming it must be her. Let me make sure. Oh, there we go. Okay. There we go. So there we go. I see her on here. So I should be able to invite her. There we go. Easy peasy. Now it should be connecting us, so it'll just take a sec. But really that's what we're showing you is examples of success. And we have people in different areas. You know, Anne was an example of someone who hadn't left our company. Okay. Kaitlyn was the example of someone who got a new job. Hi, Kaitlyn.
Hi.
And then someone who we'll be speaking to next week actually started her own business. So we're running the gamut. But hi, Kaitlyn. Welcome.
Hi. Hey, hi, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming. I was just explaining a little bit of background while we had you hop on, and the tech issues were slightly smoother this time, so I'll take it. But yeah, thanks so much for joining. For everyone, I was just giving I'll give a little bit of an overview, and then we can kind of turn over, and I have some questions for you, obviously. But really, again, anyone who doesn't already know, I'm Chris. I'm the founder of Empowered Achievers. I'm also the person who created 9 to Thrive, which is all about women supporting women and actually having this be something that's a conversation. Because I think so often career stuff is looked at as something that is kind of a drag, when really I think if you start to change a conversation and just make it more a part of everyday life and doing things intentionally, it doesn't have to be this negative, oh my gosh, this is such a chore thing. So that's why we're doing this. And this week we're doing interview series this week and next up until Career Clarity Camp. So that's why we're here today. But I am so happy to have Kaitlyn here. So for context, before I get into asking her some questions, Kaitlyn is one of my clients who I met last year through actually a friend of mine who was a referral. She used to work with her, and she is a perfect example of a client who has done so much both in her career and outside of her career as a result of it. So we'll be kind of taking her through some of the big questions and getting all those things answered. But thank you so much for joining us, Kaitlyn.
Yeah, of course. No, thank you for having me and for everything. I mean, it's coming up on close to like a year crazy that I met you. So it's been awesome.
I know. It's pretty crazy. Yeah. And there's anyone, because most people will watch us back in real time just so that it gives us, so that we can record it whenever. Mm-hmm. But anyone watching back in real time, if you have questions, you can drop them below and either Kaitlyn will see them or I'll make sure that they get to the right place. So feel free to drop them below if you have anything. But yeah, I can't believe it's been a year. It's been so much fun. I mean, you're always a person who I use as an example of what an amazing client is, because you actually are the epitome of the doer who I tend to work with and who I love working with. And so before we go too much into it, I always like to start with a couple of questions about, just tell me more about where you were before. Because obviously I know, but walk everyone else through, I guess, where you were at when we started working together, what was kind of where your headspace was at, what you were looking for, what you weren't able to get otherwise.
Yeah, definitely. So I work in Silicon Valley in tech. So that's an important part of this is I had been in the past 16 months leading up to working with Chris, there had been 4 major changes across 2 companies. I had 2 teams I was on totally cut, reorgs where they were removing roles. Had been shifted from something I loved, having that cut twice, to something I was able to do and good at, but had sort of no passion for. And I think, the big thing there, I realized I was unhappy. I knew I didn't really enjoy it. I think what was, some of the missing pieces per se were, I didn't realize how much these things had affected my mindset. I think I was very much I'd been in, tech for a while and always sort of at early stage startups. And I just had been conditioned to think like, this is something to accept. This is something that's going to keep happening. Like, is tech even for me? It was just like how I was very, very defeated. And I was also very, I don't want to say afraid to make a change, but I didn't want to make a change because I was so tired and beaten down from having to start every 4 months a new job or a new company or a new team. And I couldn't figure out, like, a lot of the things that were happening were very normal at startups, right? Reorgs were common, new leadership was common, funding changes were common. And I couldn't really pinpoint, like, is it even worth going after what I love, or do I need to wait because I'm too tired right now? And I think I really, truly believed that I would been telling myself that I really believed that this was always going to keep happening because of the industry, which is not true, but in that point it had been my experience. And then, which was a key point, I didn't realize how to separate perhaps my experience from and understand how that had conditioned my brain. And then also, I think there's that element of everything happens for a reason, or sort of God's plan, right? And I kind of just kept telling myself, like, well, sooner or later, I guess, something will work out, or there's a reason I'm struggling, I'll be stronger. I am good at this job. I'm getting great reviews. I have an amazing manager. I have a great work-life balance. I'm being paid well. Like, am I maybe just not grateful? Am I thinking about the wrong things? And I think a huge thing that was missing was that just because it happens to you doesn't mean you have no control, or you can't have an input, or that you can't make a change, or even within that change, negotiate for something you like. And I also hadn't realized how much I'd been affecting other areas of my life. We did this wheel together, and I was like, I've stopped making plans with my friends. I've been shopping too much, like, to deal with sort of the stress. Like, I didn't realize, what being so unhappy was affecting other areas. And then I think a big thing we worked on too was I didn't even realize, everyone knows what a positive mindset is, but I didn't realize how all of these changes and events, which is what Chris, you helped me to do, was realize that, like, my brain had been conditioned differently now. And there was a reason I was afraid to make these changes. And there was a reason I believed these things, and they were justified. But now I had to retrain my brain, which I never would have known how to do, and how to put a lot of effort towards that. And the reality is I would keep having problems no matter what I did, tech or not, if I didn't retrain my brain. So, yeah.
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, so much. I love that in so many ways. I think one piece that I really want to call out too is that experience of feeling like this has happened in the past, and so this is what's going to happen in the future is like everyone. I've never met someone who is so locked down on their mindset that they're like, oh, well, I guess I am totally okay with the fact that this happened and I'm separating from the rest of the world. I think that is incredibly common, but it's an experience a lot of people have. But also the piece you mentioned about, oh, well, I thought, this is just what's supposed to be happening to me. There's a fine line, and I think you kind of hit the nail on the head of there's a fine line of taking ownership and being okay with the fact that you don't have control of it. Because I think people go to the two ends of the spectrum. They're either like, well, I have no control, so I can't, might as well ride it out. And then there's other people who are like, I need to put so much control on this. And I think there's normally an in-between that's a little more helpful.
Yeah, I agree. I think there was the in-between where I was taking on a role that I knew I wasn't necessarily sold on through a reorg, but in case I wasn't going to go anywhere else, or in case I did want to try it out, like, we broke down, okay, well, what are the things you really need? And then in that conversation, just asking for them to build your own what you need within a different situation where you don't have total control. I couldn't, necessarily pound on the table and get a role that didn't exist at the company to appear, but there was a way to, like, work towards it to make my day easier, to get my learning there. And I think that was, or my learning and development, like, that I needed in that role. And I think that was something that, again, I just never would have, like, thought of, and I wouldn't know how to think about why is it that I need that, and how do I make that happen in this role that might seem like it's not a natural fit, and then how do I ask for that? Because that's always the hard part too. But when you break it down, I think working with you, like, you want it, why, because I think there's always that fear of, like, I can ask for it, but is this just going to be more work? Do I actually want this? Like, is this a Band-Aid for something else? And, like, working with you really helped me pinpoint, like, what that needed to look like.
Yeah. Oh, good. I'm so glad. And I think that also this idea of ownership, right? It's not about, as you said, I can't make something happen that doesn't exist. Ownership isn't about controlling the outcome or saying, like, I want this job, so they have to give it to me. But it's just having the conversation.
Right.
And that's the problem that people don't do, is they just are like, I really want this. I'm freaked out by it. And then there's nothing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, there's probably something in between,
Yeah.
guys, where you can like try and have that conversation and also be okay with the fact that if the company says no, then you get to decide, you know, what do I want to do from here with all the cards on the table. I feel like people are never playing with their full hand because they're kind of just like, well, it's whatever they tell me.
Yeah, and that was sort of my experience. Like that was when I look back on, I mean, one was like an early stage startup and that just, you know, was a funding issue across the company. But the other like three big changes, it was very much that it was like, well, here's what they're telling me. They're doing me a solid by, you know, keeping me employed. And I didn't, and like looking back, it was like no one was saying don't ask questions or don't ask for anything else. People cared, right? And it was just that mindset of me thinking, oh, I can't ask for this, or I don't know what to ask, or like I'm so almost distraught that this is happening again, or distraught about these options laid on the table, that it's kind of like, woe is me, and like not thinking about, well, how can I finagle this a little bit to make it work for me too? And it's interesting. I'm like, when I finally did it, I was like looking back being like, I guarantee I could have probably gotten this earlier, right? I guarantee I could have asked for these things. And it was a big wake up call, but one I'm glad I had earlier rather than later.
Yeah, you could always have it earlier, and you could always have it so much later. So
exactly.
Like that. Well, and yeah, that idea of I it's interesting hearing so much about startups specifically, because I think startups have a reputation for being so incredibly progressive, and so it's really, I think, important to remember what the other side of that coin is they're so flexible, but sometimes the downside means it's because they're so flexible,
right? And
so there might not be that same level of continuity, and I think that's a common feeling, because I know, I mean, obviously, I think everyone here knows, like, I worked in the Bay Area for a long time, and that experience of, I think, yes, there's a lot of great things that come along with working with tech companies, but I also think there's this weird environment where sometimes it's more acceptable to be a lot more like, oh, well, we're a startup, so it's not our fault that this happened.
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely. Yeah, it's interesting. I think, especially, like, I've been at quite a few startups, depending on the year of age, but definitely early stage tech companies. And like looking back now where I am and like the different levels of like intentionality I have, or realizing like, okay, I'm going to have to work on my mindset on this change, right? Are things that before it's like, let's just roll with it. This is the norm. And then what happens is time after time, it becomes a little defeating, right? And it does take, you know, an extra level of grit or thick skin to get through it. And yeah, it does. It's hidden behind, all the bells and whistles and everything that's awesome about it. But it does, I mean, it is a tough thing, and it can definitely wear on you.
Yeah, it's a weird industry. Well, and so in that vein, actually, the idea of some of the rapid change, right? You had a lot of change as a result of when we were working together. I know what they are, but not everyone else knows what they are. I laid some of them out in the overview, but can you take us through like where you've gone in the last year? Because it's been, I know that there's been a lot of new things.
Yeah. So I think I had like a phone screen scheduled when I first spoke with you for my current job that I'm in now at a different company. So, but I was still hesitant about like, what's this going to be like? So, I mean, I think one of the great things was you helped me also interview the company and not just have them interview me, and make sure it was a fit for me, which helped, me be confident, me change some of the mindset stuff. And then I was pretty grateful and lucky in the sense that they gave me the offer in January, but I couldn't start until May. So I had the opportunity to then travel and basically backpack around New Zealand and Asia for a while. And one of the things we worked on, or we had discovered, or not, I discovered, you already knew, is how a lot of these mindsets come, you're a whole person. I always think of that's like the phrase you always say, right? That these mindsets are these blockers of like needing to plan and needing to always be busy and needing to kind of reach my maximum potential and like need to be exhausted or I'm not using all my skills. I mean, those have been things I've been dealing with since I was a kid, right? Like there's a reason we were introduced. And that break was actually a great time to work on those, not because it was a break, but because it all happened quickly and I didn't have time to plan a 2-month trip, which, would be my nightmare before. Like I plan everything, I maximize everything. Like this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. But really learning, I think, how to enjoy life without a plan and how to show up and kind of make decisions in the moment, or be okay with not being prepared, or be okay with missing out, and like surviving and trying new things and realizing that like that I need to be learning to be happy and like pushing myself, whether that's doing this like 7-hour cave swim in New Zealand, right? Or a cooking class in Bali or wherever else, right? And like reminding myself of like pushing myself to like those limits are things that helped me build and get back to my, when I was back in my career. And I learned how to not have to feel like I needed to prepare for every single meeting I walked into because, well, I would land in a country without a plan or a place to go and have to figure it out then. And so I think, while that's a unique situation that not everyone can go through, I think really a huge thing that I took away from working with you was understanding how it's not just in the office you have to work on these things. And I think realizing, some of the fears or things that hold me back at work are things from, being on the swim team or growing up or with my friends, right? And like, it's weird. You don't think they translate, but you realize like, okay, this is a bigger belief. And where did this started at age 11, right? And, and I think learning to undo that everywhere in my life, especially when traveling, has made me get a lot more out of working with you because I'm realizing there's a bunch of ways to retrain my brain every single day in all different moments. And also it kind of removes the pressure of having to perfect everything at work as well. Like it's realizing like it might not even be a work issue. It might be an outside of work issue that you're bringing here. So I think that was great. And then in starting and also learning how to be more intentional and like in that moment. And so I think then when we came back, I was also planning my wedding at the same time of doing all of this. So it was definitely a busy year. But I also learned a lot about how to like manage stress, how to manage my time, how to not freak out about little things. And there was like a huge shift. I know a lot of people are stressed when they plan their wedding. It was a lot easier for me after I started working with you and having different techniques to like, time block or learn how to prioritize differently in different areas of my life.
Opposed to
yes.
top priority.
Yeah. And then from there, when I started my new job, it was also still an overwhelming time. I hadn't gotten married yet. And I definitely could see the difference in me in terms of not feeling like I had to over prepare for everything, feeling like it was okay to speak up being new and like not worry about like what was being said. Also how to, have I was coming into one of the earliest stage companies I'd worked at actually. And so there definitely was a ton of change and a lot to be done and a lot of opportunity and kind of jumping in and not worrying, about having all the answers was huge. And then continuing to work with you, I know at one point I had said like I don't know what we're gonna talk about when I just once I get through this I'll be good, but realizing that mindset does take a long time and it's still not perfect, right? It's something like I have to work on every day and continue to work on, but it's definitely come a long way.
Yeah, well, and I think what you just mentioned too, that idea of what do I have to do?
Yeah,
I think that's a really common feeling because I think oftentimes people feel like coaching or working on your career as a whole is only something that's worth it when you have a problem. And so that's not particularly a good setup because the reality is if you're waiting until you have a problem, then you will often try and force the conversation a little bit quicker. So I've had it multiple times on consults where people are like, oh yeah, well, can we have our intake call today? And then can we have our first call tomorrow? And I'm like, well, maybe not so much. Hi, Gail. Hi, Alejandra. Yeah, but it's very much one of those things where I think sometimes people try and force it and really push it so that because they feel like they don't have time to get through it. And so exactly that feeling of doing it when you're like, I don't know what it's necessarily going to be. There is always something about figuring out. I know a lot that we worked on with you when you did start there was how to be a really great manager and some of those skills that again, right? Oftentimes, and again, you're not the only one who has this. A lot of times people feel like they're like, okay, I have this nailed down. I know how to be a good manager. And then they get in there and they're like, oh my God.
Yeah.
There are so many more intricacies or small questions, or what do I do in this situation that aren't fully formed yet. So
yeah, no, definitely. I mean, that was my experience too, right? Like personalities are different. Like structures are different. Company cultures are different. And it's like you have to somehow, be new, learn how to do your job and navigate all of these things. And it can be really tough. And I think one of the biggest things that was, a huge difference in all of working with you in this situation is taking time to think about how to handle those things. Like that was probably the biggest benefit of coaching, right? Was we're all so busy. Everyone knows it. We talk about it all the time. People are busier now. You go, 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 go. I'm super fast, type A, right? And if it's like, oh, you mean to fix this, it's a problem. And then all of a sudden it's way bigger. You want to fix it now, but then something else comes up. But like every week, like having a plan, like space where we just talk about like, what do I actually need to work on? Like, what's the real issue here? Is it what you think it is, or is it something different? And then like spending time coming away with like, here's how I'm going to attack that, having homework to like follow up on it, to hold you accountable, because it's really hard to do those things on your own.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like personal trainer versus going to the gym on your own, right? It depends on your internal versus external willpower. And if you have super great internal willpower, sweet, more power to you. I know for myself, when it comes to doing things, I often need that accountability of like, hey, I told you I was going to do this, so I did it. Yay.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's knowing what works for you for sure. You also, I just want to touch on super quickly, because obviously when we kind of started this conversation, or when we were talking about where you were at the start, you had an interview lined up, you were in that process. You talked a little bit about interviewing them also, but can you talk a little more to the idea of like actually making sure that it's a mutual fit, and like what you needed to do to make sure? Because I think going into it too, what I want to kind of recognize is that you were definitely feeling the nerves, which again is tied to mindset, which we talked about a bit, but you were feeling the nerves of like, how do I know that I even want to take this? So I feel like for you, the biggest thing that I saw, and I'm curious if this is a case on your take too, but I think the biggest thing that I saw from the outside that was so amazing to watch was you started to just be like, okay, I know that this is what I want to do. And I give myself permission, because we took the time to say, work on your purpose statement, say, here's who I am at my best. Here's what the kind of things that I want to be doing more of. And so I feel like it kind of, you ended with more permission of like, I'm okay with the fact that I'm on this path. So it's kind of mindset, but also just like talking about okay with the path as a whole.
Yeah. Because it was interesting. I had a job I loved, and then through these changes had sort of just lost it, and wanted to interview to go back to it. And that was where I realized I was so stuck, because I was so hesitant, and I knew I had loved it when I did it before. And it was like, what's happening here? And I think it was really figuring out and breaking down, like, why at my core being do I like that versus something else? Because on paper, my other job actually kind of seemed better, right? Especially if you broke down like the money and, like I said, everything else, the amazing manager and, work-life balance, like it didn't, type of clients I was working with, like it seemed great. And so, and it wasn't and I know something's better for someone else, but I was like, why have I been so hesitant to go back to what I love? And I think I wasn't sure. I had been rattled by these other things. And I think we broke down like, what are the things that really drive me? Like, what, like, when am I my best self? Like, why is that? And like being okay with the fact that, there's things about me that I knew, like none of it was shocking, but understanding that was why not only this past job, but other jobs or other experiences I was so drawn to, and what that mattered and why that mattered to me. And then you have to come up with questions of like, how do you find that like I always need to be learning and challenged, right? And everyone will tell you about their culture of like, yeah, we put our managers in a leadership program or whatever, right? But how do you figure out what you actually get out of that? And when that program ends, how do I make sure I'm not going to be ongoing bored, right? And that's fine. And like, it might be on me to challenge myself, and that's okay. But like, how do I know that going into it so that I'm not severely disappointed? And how do you ask those tough questions and sort of go in with and listen for key things that they tell me about like these core things that I'm going to need? And I think also, nothing is going to be perfect, right? But understanding what are the things I need to make sure I get out of this in order to be happy. And that was like a huge differentiator going in, to have that confidence to be like, okay, so everything else still might change, but here are core things that I know that they're going to show up with, that I'm committed to, and that I know now to spend more time investing in here or looking for to keep myself happy is another part of it too, which is very different than like letting things happen for a reason. Yeah.
Well, and because success to you versus success to someone else is always a different thing. And so I think that's summed it up perfectly, of how it's like each person is slightly different. So it's all about figuring out what it is that you like and figuring out how to incorporate more of that.
Yeah. And also not being too afraid of like, this is going to cap here, right? It was kind of weird, that conversation of like, here are all these broader things that you're interested in and that drive you and are your purpose. And yes, they align to this job, which seems maybe a little more specific, but like, here's where in the future you can take that, and not being worried that like, if I change this path, that means something else in 5 years or 10 years. And like, I was almost trying to like mitigate risk in the future earlier on.
Yeah, it replaces your end goal. And I think we've talked about this before on this, in this group, but like replaces your end goal from, instead of saying, I'm going to do all these things, which is then if anything changes, you feel terrified and like everything's bottoming out. Instead, it replaces with, it gives you structure yet flexibility,
Yes.
which is why I always go that route, is because you're like, I know where I'm going towards, but also I know that the steps on that path can change and it's not going to take me totally derailed into the fetal position.
Exactly.
So
yes.
that's always a good thing. And then last but not least, can you tell, obviously you made a bunch of big changes. Anything else notable that you kind of want to call out, or anything you want to highlight in terms of, obviously we've talked a bit about mindset, but anything else that stood out to you?
What was I going to say? I mean, the biggest things were just like mindset, that, how much it affects everything else outside of your life. And then also I think the work that needs to be put in, like kind of ongoing forever, is something that I think, no one teaches you that growing up, that like, how you learn how to learn for school, how to be trained for your job, but this other stuff of like being intentional with what you want, or taking time to think about how you're going to ask for something, or taking time to think about what you want, or how to get out what you want of a situation. I mean, that's something that's ongoing and is really hard to do. And I think I've learned a lot of tools and tips from you that I can use in so many different situations, and that I've even like used as a manager on some people when they're struggling, who are on my team. And so I think it's really beneficial, but it's never ending. And I think like you always said that, and I don't know if I really believed it. Not that I thought you were leading me astray, but I think realizing that even when I'm in a great spot, there's always something else that comes up that you have to remind yourself. And that's why I think like whether it's, working with you or being in a group or having a book or whatever it is, it's like, how do you make that time? And I think that's a big shift for me that I'm trying to continue on for the future. Cause I think it kind of makes you be your best self, but it's easier said than done.
Yeah. And that's so true. I think often people like to think of things as solving specific problems. Really, the best clients from my perspective, the clients who are my favorite to work with, are people in situations like you, who it's like, this is more, you incorporate it as more of a lifestyle.
Yeah.
And acknowledging the fact that, I mean, I have so many clients who, after we wrap a specific package, are like, can we do one-offs? And I know we're kind of in that situation where we meet less frequently, but to talk about things as a whole, hone your management skills, to really sharpen them up. But the reason that so many people do that is because you realize, you're like, even when you're in a great place, it doesn't mean you have career changes you're doing because you're in a bad spot, right? It's about, I'm figuring out how to always be honing these skills because I'm a lifelong learner.
Right.
You're never going to be one day and wake up and be like, well, I guess I know all the management skills I ever needed to learn. So
right.
I have never seen anyone do that, and I highly doubt that you will. So again, right, not to make it feel intimidating, because I don't think it has to be this, like, it doesn't mean you have to work with a coach for your entire life. My goal is for people to never, to learn enough and feel like they have the tools so that they don't need me. And some people do it that way too, but it's really all about figuring out that this is just a lifestyle, that like, that's what makes you such a perfect example of a great client, is you really say like, okay, I need to put the time into this, and you do.
Yeah.
And that sounds silly, but yet that's such a gap I see with people. And so that's, to me, what makes you such an amazing client, because that's a common misstep, and you really were able to take that and run with it and be like, okay, well, I have to take the time to put this in. Like, I'm going to build in a new habit so that this becomes easier, opposed to something that feels like a total chore.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean,
I feel like you really
yeah, because I was kind of like, I've been in like the real world almost 10 years. Like I've been fine thus far, right? And then you realize like, oh, this does take this level of like putting in the time and being like really real with yourself too is a huge part of it.
Yeah.
And really like admitting and maybe going places you don't want to go, and like realizing like why you need to change this, or what's happening, and then just making it. I remember being like, oh yeah, I'll be sad when this ends with Chris, but like, I don't know, like I guess I'll never see her again, right? And now I'm like, because I was like, because I was in such a good spot through working with you, and then like that was like a huge compliment, but then I was like, oh no, wait, now I want this. I don't, like before I felt like I needed it, and now it's this like want in this life that I want to build. So it's different.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to be, and you're right, that everyone does it different way. Some people are like, okay, great. I've learned it all, and I want to try doing this on my own. And that I 100% support. Some people are like, oh, I want to keep pushing myself to the next level. And I think, to me, that's what makes you so special, is you can get to something that you're like, this is such a good place. What's the next step? And where can I go to make it even better? And I think that really highlights what an amazing person you are.
Well,
so
thanks.
Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for sharing with everyone your experience. I'm sure it will be really helpful. If anyone has questions, you can kind of drop them below as they come up, and we'll pop in answer those. But thank you for sharing your experience with everyone, because I think if everyone can kind of get a little more Kaitlyn in their life and start to make moves to taking that kind of ownership and doing it, you'll be in a really good spot. So I'm so glad to have you here. I so appreciate you. And I'll share for everyone who's watching, I will share Kaitlyn's info below. So the company that she works for is hiring. Do you want to talk a little bit more about what they're hiring for, or kind of?
I mean, we're hiring a lot. So I'm hiring for my team. I manage sort of a junior sales team, and then but we are hiring a ton if anyone is interested, or if anyone wants to hear more about like my experience or is in something similar. Like, I'm more than happy to chat, because I think it's been, I mean, like, life-changing, not to be silly, but like, it sounds like a big word, but it has been, and it's been and like a great year, but also it's a ton of work and it's always still hard. Yeah. So always happy to chat with anyone else about that kind of stuff too, or their own situation.
Yay, thank you, Kaitlyn.
Of course.
And also so yeah, I'll drop her LinkedIn below then. So if you are looking for that, and like, who wouldn't want to be managed by that angel, who also practices her management skills all the time. So I can tell you right now, she's a good one. You won't regret it. But yeah, I'll put her info below if you want to reach out to her. You will see her around in the group. And then, as she talked about, right, we talked about the conversation of mindset a bit today. We remember that we have that training tomorrow, and we're going to be talking all about some of the key beliefs that are really helpful in terms of success, and it's all about mindset. So if that's something that you're like, wow, that area sounds interesting, we'll go a lot more into that tomorrow. And it's also a big element of all of my programming. So all of the one-on-one work that Kaitlyn and I did, for like that whole program, I've chunked up into these 5 pillars that has then been translated into Career Clarity Camp. So that's what's rolling out in the next 2 weeks. And it's really a program that's set up in order to kind of replace some of my one-on-one bandwidth, because I was at the point where I was like, oh, I only have so many hours in the day to meet with client one-on-one. So while I still do that, Career Clarity Camp is pretty much set up to take you through all those modules. You have one-on-one private coaching and group coaching and self-study modules. So it's kind of a perfect storm. It's across 3 months. So if anyone has questions about that or wants to learn more, you can either just drop CCC below or DM me. I will send you all the info for it. But it starts in a little over a week, actually. I was going to say less than 2 weeks, but now it's getting a little over a week, which is exciting. But yeah, it's that same kind of program. So if you want to see those same kind of transformations and really go to that ownership, go to the place of actually feeling like you're really clear on where you're going, instead of this like, I think I want to do this. Do I want to do this? All of those things that Kaitlyn highlighted, go through mindset, all that stuff, reach out to me and I can definitely share more with you on that.
Sounds awesome, Chris.
Yeah, thank you for joining us, Kaitlyn. I'm so thankful to have you here. You are such a wonderful client, and I so adore you. So thank you.
Well, thank you. It's been awesome to be here. So yeah, anytime.
Yeah. Okay, I'll drop your info.
All right, thanks. Bye, Chris.
Kaitlyn, have a good one. Bye, everyone.